What's that? You can go ahead and get it started. It'll take a minute, right? Oh, it's ready to go? All right. Smithville Board of Alderman work session is now called to order. First item on the agenda is Transportation Master Plan presentation. Mr. Souls, it's all yours.
All right, so I'm going to take my mask off so I can better project. Good evening. Beautiful day here. Spring's upon us. So I'm Chuck Souls, I'm the Public Works Director. We began this process of developing the Transportation Master Plan nearly a year ago. Last year, March 2nd, 2021 is when the board approved moving forward with tool design to complete the Transportation Master Plan. A steering committee consisting of the mayor, Alderwoman Kabilski, Alderman Chevalier, the chamber director, a school representative, a member of the public, a planning director, city administrator, and myself, the public works director. We're all part of that steering committee. We also included Mark, Mid-America Regional Council, and MoDOT. They were also involved. We were also guided by public input through a community survey and a pop-out meeting, and we have posted the plan to the city's website, and we invite the public to go on. We've got a form you can fill out. You can give us your comments. We'd like to see those by March 18th. Similar to our other infrastructure plans, like the Water Master Plan and the Wastewater Master Plan, the Transportation Master Plan builds upon our comprehensive plan and our Parks and Recs Master Plan to prepare a transportation network for the future, improving traffic flow and congestion management, and providing for all modes of transportation, not just automobiles, but walkers and bikers included. The plan also includes safe routes to schools, trails, access to employment, shopping, parks and recreation facilities, neighborhood connectivity for all users and all abilities. Transportation planning is the process of looking at the current state of our transportation network in the area, designing for our future needs, and combining all of that with budgets, community goals, our visions, and policies. Over the last 15 years, you guys all know Smithville has grown and it's going to continue to grow. The purpose of the Transportation Master Plan is to make us better and to make better informed decisions that will improve mobility for all residents and visitors in all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. It addresses the needs of the transportation system's users, including walkers, bicyclists, children, school-age children, freight, and motor vehicles. The plan is not necessarily prescriptive. It's meant to provide overall guidance to maintain the community's identity, the local small town feel, as development occurs. More planning will be needed for individual projects and will include things like alignment studies, additional public comment, and specific designs. The plan also has additional or recommends additional tools for the city to consider that would require developers to analyze and help pay for the impact of development on our community through impact study requirements and potentially impact fees to lessen development costs to the community at large. The Transportation Master Plan is also needed and sometimes required as we apply for state and federal funding for some of these projects. So with that, I'm going to introduce Tammy Sufi and Sarah Davis with Tool Design and let them walk us through the Transportation Master Plan.
Okay, well, first I just want to say thank you so much for giving us the privilege to work on the Smithville Transportation Master Plan. I think this is just such a gem of a community, and I've learned so much about your community and what makes it special, and we've tried to reflect that in the plan. And so I just wanted to thank you for that opportunity. What we're going to do tonight, again, I'm Tammy Sufi. I'm a senior planner with Tool Design, and I've got Sarah Davis with me, who's a junior planner. We're going to walk you through the highlights of the plan and kind of, try to answer any questions that you may have. Of course, I'm either not doing this right or it's not working. I have to point this way at the computer over there. Still not working.
Linda, it worked when you tried.
Help.
You have the magic touch, apparently.
We're off to a great start. Let's see. Oh, okay, that'll work. Hopefully. And then just the arrows. Okay.
Or in one of the other. Not gonna work either. Well, shoot, sorry. You worked earlier.
I know.
We tested it.
Make sure it's in presentation.
Oh, there we go. Okay, what'd
That
you
right
do?
there.
That one? Okay. Okay, great. So we're going to walk you through kind of the process that we went through and the highlights of the plan. The plan itself is about 45 pages, but then with multiple appendices. So if you haven't had a chance to really dig into it, the bulk of the plan is really pretty succinct for a plan like this. But then we've got all the nitty gritty details in the appendices. So we'll hit the highlights and then also try to answer your questions. So I just wanted to first kind of talk through the process that we went through. And these are the steps here on the slide. Extensive public engagement. We reviewed previous plans. We did some traffic forecasts. We did connectivity and gap analysis. We also developed some traffic impact study requirements that Chuck mentioned, and we're going to go into details on all of this. And then we also developed really what can also serve as a standalone guide. It's in the appendix, but there's a complete streets policy and design guide that's really going to help the city set the design standards for the streets and give you some more leverage when working with developers to make certain requirements in those roadway designs. So we'll talk about that as well as the final plan and implementation. So just to briefly cover what we did as far as public engagement. As Chuck mentioned, we worked with the steering committee over the past year, and we had 3 meetings with that committee. We held a pop-up meeting at the Price Chopper back in June, and that was a fantastic way to get input. People don't necessarily always love to come to meetings like this, so we did a pop-up at the Price Chopper. We had contact with about 200 people. Some people we said, I don't want to talk about transportation. And we said, wait, you don't have any complaints about transportation. And that brought them right to the table. So we got some, I think, really good feedback from people that we maybe wouldn't normally hear from. We also had an online community survey with over 400 responses, which I think is really great, especially considering that you've just done a couple other major plans where people provided input to those as well. And then, as Chuck mentioned, we have posted the full plan and all the appendices to the city website, and we encourage anybody to comment on those between now and March 18th. Some of the key takeaway messages that we heard through the public input process. One, it's really a priority to get people around safely and comfortably around the city. Highway 69, I don't have to tell this group probably, Highway 69 can really be a barrier. It divides your community, the east and the west sides of town. It can be difficult to cross, whether you're in a motor vehicle at an unsignalized intersection, or if you're somebody who's trying to walk or bike along that corridor. And downtown can be a pinch point too. So those were some areas that we looked at. We looked at opportunities for more walking, biking, and trail connections. And then just kind of the general main or like downtown and surrounding areas. We really looked at that area as well and looked for opportunities to better make connections north, south, and east, west throughout the city. So how do we do that? So we started with some traffic forecasts. After hearing some from the public, we worked with Wilson and Company and a Kansas City-based office of that engineering firm. And we started with the Mid-America Regional Council's traffic forecasts. We adjusted those based on the MoDOT projected traffic volumes, and then also looking at your 2030 comp plan that you just finished. We looked at the projected development that's in that plan. And then we also looked at the Institute for Transportation Engineers daily traffic or daily trip generation rates. And that's kind of the standard way of doing traffic forecasts. And then we made some assumptions about how quickly development might actually occur. And we did that based on some conversations with city staff about things like sewer capacity and all those other things that are really maybe going to constrain development. And given those estimates, it is looking like about 5,000 new daily trips could be added to Mo 92, and about 10,000 new daily trips could be added to 169 if the area develops to 25% of the comp plan vision. And so given that, we really wanted to make sure that we were working to accommodate that growth so that you don't have a lot of congestion without a network of arterials and collectors that might limit further development in those areas south of 92 where you have some projected employment areas and new centers of development. But also we thought that it was important to have some alternative routes, both east-west and north-south, for just for existing traffic and for, say, when there's a traffic incident on 169, to provide that kind of, we call it like redundancy in routes so that there's other alternative routes. And we're going to go into some of the specific new roadways that we're proposing in a few minutes. Okay, so we also did field work. We spent time driving around with staff, with Chuck and with Jack, the planning director, and Matt from Parks and Rec to really kind of understand the city. And then we also came back with our team and did some additional analysis of the roadways in general, but also specifically of the routes around the schools. And then we worked with the steering committee on a complete streets policy to help guide future transportation projects in the city. I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but just wanted to hit on some of the highlights. Some of the key things that the committee wanted to include in there were safe, complete, and connected network of streets for the residents and visitors of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds, so that they can walk or use wheelchairs, bike, and drive to reach destinations. We also talk in the complete streets vision or policy about maintaining that small town community feel, which we've heard through in multiple ways is important to the city, and to provide some choices for transportation for residents, visitors, and employees that come to Smithville. Okay, so with that, I'm going to jump into what's in the plan itself. And some of that you can see here. I just wanted to give you like a snapshot of the table of contents. The way the plan starts is why even do a transportation master plan? And a lot of that has to do with some of the things that Chuck was talking about. It's really important for future funding, for getting funding from Mark, for kind of making sure you're ready for any future growth. The plan goes through the planning process that I kind of just hit on really quickly. Then we talk a little bit about Smithville today and existing demographics and transportation system. And then the focus of the plan is really on those recommendations for both new roadways, but also for trails, sidewalks, et cetera. So we're going to go through these items. I wanted to hit on, before we get into some of the meat of the plan, I wanted to hit on those guiding principles that we also included as part of the Complete Streets policy. I think these are really important for kind of just setting the tone of how you plan and implement transportation from here on out. So again, that idea of transportation for all, really serving the broader community, making safe connections, building a strong community, and then also future focused investments. So really trying to focus on those investments that are going to be most important to supporting future economic growth for the city. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, and she's going to talk you through some of the demographics of Smithville, and then also some of the recommendations, and then I'll come back and finish the rest of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm going to be going through, like Tammy said, some of the demographics and initial recommendations. So we think it's really important for everybody to be on the same page with the demographics and population groups represented in the community before we get into recommendations. So we pulled the total population under 18, and population 65 plus for Smithville, Kansas City Metro, and Missouri, so we could just have a regional context to compare Smithville to. We also looked at vulnerable populations, specifically people who may not have reliable access to a motor vehicle. And we found that 7% of the population under 65 reported having a disability, 6% of the population reported living in poverty, and 4% reported having no reliable vehicle at their household. We also wanted to look at commute patterns, and we found that over 1,500 people come from outside of the community into the community to work. About 400 people live and work in the community, and about 4,600 people live in Smithville and leave the community for work. And this just goes to show there's a lot of traffic movement in and out of the community at those peak commute times. So that's really important for planning future roadways. And so like we talked about before, there's definitely a need for more redundancy in north-south and east-west connections throughout the community. And we know Smithville is going to grow, but we want to keep that small town community feel that everybody in the public comment said was so important to them. And so we came up with these rules of thumb for both the transportation master plan and the complete streets design guidelines. So firstly, considering context just means for future retrofits or new roadways, we want to make sure we're looking at all users of the road in the design process. We're also looking at land use context and the complete streets design guidelines for guidance. We also are recommending constructing 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of all roads, 6-foot sidewalks on arterials and collectors, or a 10-foot shared use path for bicycles and pedestrians with a sidewalk on the other side of the street. And we're also recommending a 3-foot buffer in between the sidewalk and the street, which is really important to just promote like safety and feeling comfortable on the sidewalk for both people on the sidewalk and on the road. And finally, are also moderating speeds, target speeds, which is keeping speeds at or below 30 miles per hour. There's some exceptions to this, like US 169 and other arterials and collectors throughout the community. And right-sizing roadways, which means keeping the roadways between 2 and 3 lanes. Again, some of those same exceptions as before, but we want to make sure that we retain that small town community feel. One of those exceptions, again, is US 169, and we've talked before about how that can be a barrier for the community, so we just want to make sure we're not planning more of those barriers. So next, we have the proposed new roadways alignments, and these are super rough as like draft corridors where new roadways could go. A lot more public involvement and study will need to go to figure out exact alignments of these roadways. We just looked at areas where we were expected to see growth and wanted to make sure we were providing infrastructure for that growth. So I believe Tammy is going to try and point out. Yeah. Sorry for those online, you might not get the full experience, but we have potential new arterials on the east and west edges of the city in green dotted lines. Sorry, my eyesight is terrible. Potential, is it, sure, yeah, I can't.
North-south connection over here and also over here. Potential new major collector right here. And potentially also down here to make some more of those east-west connections. And then where DD is coming across, continuing that on and making more of a connection on into Platte County. And then we also have some of the roadways in the future will need to work, or the city will need to.
Tammy, would you use this?
I'm
I
so
think
sorry.
Leanne.
Yes. I didn't realize that could move.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're lucky I'm not going to break into song here. So I think that also the city, we've made some recommendations about the city continuing to coordinate with MARC, the Mid-America Regional Council. They maintain a functional class map. And maybe I should back up for a second and just explain functional class is kind of the standard way that transportation agencies look at the roadway system. And arterials are those busier roads. For example, 169 is a principal arterial. There are also minor arterials. And then they go down to collector and then local roads. And those all have funding, different funding and designs attached to them. So that's why it's important. And so we're also recommending a few changes to functional class in the future as the city continues to develop, especially that area south of 92. So that's what some of these other dotted lines are too, not necessarily new roadways, but changes to classification. Okay, do you want me to stay up here for the next slide in case it's hard to see also, or you got that one? Okay, I'm gonna give you the mic back.
Thank you. All All right, along with those proposed new roadway corridors, we looked at active transportation, which just means looking at facilities for people walking, biking, using assisted mobility of devices. And we looked at the sidewalks existing in the community, and on the map, you're seeing the green lines are sidewalks with both sides. The orange lines are sidewalks on one side, and the purple dotted lines are sidewalk improvements. We also looked at trails in partnership with the Parks and Rec Department and looking at previous planning efforts. We identified multiple possible trail connections, one of which being the Riverwalk Trail, which is like a dotted light purple line that spans east and west across Smithville, bridging that gap of 169 that many people have to face whenever they're using active transportation. I went backwards. All right. Another element that we got from public comment and previous planning efforts were implementing gateways and roundabouts around the community. And gateways are a great way to create placemaking and really have people feel like they're entering a community. A lot of times we heard in public comment that people felt like other people outside of Smithville see Smithville as a pass-through kind of town. So we wanted to propose some gateways to make people say like, oh, cool, there's this downtown area I can go to, or all these different destinations around the town that I can go check out. So that's the list of the gateways. And then along with roundabouts, we were thinking in the north, some of those older intersections that can be kind of tricky to navigate, especially if we're expecting growth in that area. We wanted to propose roundabouts just to better facilitate circulation in those areas. We also heard a lot about 169 in our public comment. We heard a lot of times that it was a barrier for the east and west communities. And so we are proposing the city work with MoDOT, kind of like how Tammy brought up before, to ensure that the sections of 169 nearby downtown and around the hospital are more pedestrian friendly. And then in the north, we want to retain the rural character area up there. We don't really want to change or propose any growth there. And then finally, in the south, we're proposing an employment district overlay. So we just want to make sure we're balancing the new infrastructure down there to be sure that we are accommodating for the new jobs that will be there. And finally, we visited the schools in the community to look at safe routes to school. And our major takeaways were just like improvements to the inner circulation on the school campuses, things like crosswalk paint where kids are going to be crossing, sidewalks where kids are going to be walking, just to better make it safer for both drivers and walkers and bike riders. And that's it for my section. Tammy will be back with you guys.
Thank you. Okay, so Sarah went through kind of quickly, and we will have questions at the end so that we can help clarify anything. She went through all the sort of physical improvements and those recommendations, but we are also recommending some policy and coordination and programs as well. And so I just wanted to touch on those. The first one being to adopt the Complete Streets policy and design guidelines that are part of the appendix. That is one of the primary recommendations of this plan. To implement traffic impact study requirements, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute, but again, we feel that there's probably some ways that the city can require more of developers to help share that cost of the development and the impact. Many other communities in the region already do that. There are some places where the current subdivision code could be updated to encourage more connected active transportation networks. Often we see like cul-de-sacs that end in neighborhoods that might be physically close to each other, but don't have those connections between them. And a lot of times people don't want those connections because it brings extra traffic, but maybe just providing some at least pedestrian connections between some of those adjacent neighborhoods could really help. We think continuing, and the city's already doing some of these things, but continuing to build and strengthen those relationships with MoDOT, MARC, Clay County, just to really establish those and to coordinate on important transportation infrastructure. Ongoing coordination with planning, parks, schools, some parking policies in the future that might consider how active transportation can reduce parking needs. So that's, I think, a little bit further out, but just kind of keeping that in mind. And then begin to develop some policies for whatever the future may hold. So automated vehicles, bike share, scooter share, those things that we haven't even imagined yet, but to proactively work on policies for those upcoming things as well. So I wanted to talk just a little bit more about the traffic impact study recommendations. And so what we're suggesting or recommending is that the city start to require traffic impact studies for development that is on arterials and collectors, or for development that generates more than, say, 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips. And those are not hard and fast, but that's just kind of maybe a place to start in developing that policy. And then the traffic impact study is typically completed by the developer or their consultant. And the idea is to help anticipate and then mitigate any impacts on adjacent roadways or sidewalks, just to anticipate those needs that might be impacted by the development, and then have the developer either contribute in some way or provide some additional infrastructure to again, help mitigate any traffic impacts. And then we also talk a little bit in the traffic, there's a traffic impact study memo in the back of the transportation master plan, and there's more details in there. There's a few different ways that communities have addressed traffic impact fees, and there's some requirements about rough proportionality. Developers shouldn't be having to pay for existing traffic problems, but just for anything that their development impacts. There's some strategies about the process for fees and how those fees might be able to be shared among future developers as well. So there's more details in the traffic impact study requirements, but we think this is an important thing as Smithville continues to grow that the city should consider. And then just the last thing, and unfortunately you can't read that as well as I was hoping, but there is a table in the plan for those highest priority projects. And so those are listed here, starting with the new roadways, but also including the sidewalk and trail projects. And then we've also included a time frame here and what the possible funding sources are. And these timeframes range from short term, which would be 1 to 2 year. I believe the only short-term projects we have are sidewalks and trails. And then the longer term or midterm projects are 2 to 7 years. And then the long-term projects are 8 to 20 years, really kind of going out. But one of the reasons you want to be keeping all of this in mind is, say, as properties perhaps get sold and subdivided, you want to be thinking about things like the right-of-way dedication and just planning for those roadways so you're not missing future opportunities to have intact and utilize corridors for future needs. I think we're just about at the end. Oh no, I forgot there's a whole other section on complete streets design guidelines. We're close to the end though. So as I mentioned before, we also have an appendix, which is our complete streets design guidelines. So this builds on the policy that we already talked about for providing transportation for all. That does not mean a bike lane on every street. That just means like for every street that you're thinking about building or retrofitting, you're considering what the needs of various users are. We also developed cross sections, and this is just an example of a local street cross section. This is really going to help out Public Works in terms of having clear guidance on things like the thickness of the asphalt, the width of the sidewalk, the width of the lanes, et cetera. And then we've also included in the Complete Streets Design Guidelines some access management recommendations. Now, Smithville does not have control over 169, that's MoDOT, and some of these other roadways that need this access management, but getting this in here is important. And as you develop and perhaps have commercial areas on other roadways, this will give you some guidance on how frequently you may want to space driveways. And it really can help mitigate those issues of stacking traffic on roadways and keeping some of the circulation for commercial development on the commercial property itself instead of back out onto the major roadway. So that's the idea behind those guidelines. Okay, and then to wrap up, before we do questions, I just wanted to say that we've already gotten a handful of comments, and I think they still are continuing to flow in. So we just kind of wanted to touch on what some of those comments are and some of the concerns. And again, this is a draft plan, public comment. We've asked for comments before March 18th. Obviously, we want to hear this group's thoughts on this plan. So we won't peel the word draft off of that plan until you feel that it's ready to go and we've made whatever changes we need to. So we got some positive comments about the safe routes to school improvements around 180th and close to the school and the need for new sidewalks and crossings. Got some comments about 169 and increasing commerce. This suggestion was for a bypass, and I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that or what the details of that are, but I do think it kind of maybe falls in line with some of our ideas about creating some of these gateways into the community, having some alternative routes for north-south, but also still making sure that people are aware of Smithville and can bring in some of that commercial activity to the downtown area. I'm not going to read all of these. I did want to mention that we've coordinated with the Smithville School Board schools representative, and we would like to take one thing that's in the plan out. We had talked about potentially moving a driveway at Eagle Creek Elementary to make it safer for pedestrians to cross there. And apparently there are some really good reasons why that is there, including sewer lift and some other things that we don't want to mess with. So we have other recommendations about getting pedestrians across at other locations. So that's just a minor tweak that we'd like to make to that recommendation. And then here are just a couple other comments about the traffic flow downtown and some comments about making this information more readily advertised and able to be reviewed. So we are working on getting the word out more about the plan being posted on the city's website. And again, just want to reiterate, we are welcoming comment until March 18th. So with that, I'd love to try to answer any questions that you may have.
So thanks, Linda. Logistically, would it be hard to keep public comment open until the end of the month?
I mean, for us, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is the community's plan, and the more public input we get, the better the plan will be.
Okay.
So, we can keep it open as long as the board desires, and
Yeah, we started down this path in 2018. I don't think 2 extra weeks is going to hurt us.
it's not gonna hurt us.
Any other comments from the board? Alderman Hartman, anything? No?
No, Mayor, I think it's a great plan. I would definitely be interested in hearing from our constituents out there. So it looks like you got some comment cards.
I do. And we got a budget update from our finance department, so that'd be fun. Which one came in first? You input numbers. Allie? All right, first one, Allie McLean, please state your name, address for the record, and you're limited to 3 minutes.
I'm Allie McLean.
Please step up to the microphone so they can hear you online.
Hi, I'm Allie McLean. I live at 1004 Coneflower Street in Smithville. My questions were, part of it was that, why were we just allowing just the 2 weeks? I think we need more time. We have a lot of older citizens. We should allow them enough time to actually read it. Because let's be real, a lot of them are going to do a hard copy. They're going to print it out and read it. And they're going to highlight. Some of the stuff that I was looking through in this and I thought was interesting was the fact that mostly everybody talked about repairing a lot of the streets in that, which was really good. That was very enlightening. I think the only problem I had was with the Appendix B, the exceptions and accommodations, where it basically just says that the Board of Aldermen are the ones that are going to approve. Is there some flexibility there with the citizens? So if they say, we're kind of a little further out to 169, we're not really in city limits, we're kind of sort of in limbo, who's going to take care of our needs?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kobe, you're up. Please
I
state
just-
name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Kobe Hove, and I live at 404 Lakeview.
Just a little bit so we can hear you in the mic.
I'm Kobe Hove, and I live at 404 Lakeview Drive. I just wanted to talk about the trails and stuff because I know that all the kids at this community would really like to go downtown and buy things, but they just can't because all the roads are very busy and they can't get anywhere without having a car almost hit them. There's many places we could put trails. And that's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Kobe. Yeah, I also know you had mentioned riding your bike to school as well.
Yeah, I just want to do that as well.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions for Chuck? Or to address the public comment? Everybody okay with extending it 2 weeks? Anybody have any
That's a
heartburn?
great plan, Mary.
All right.
Yep.
So we'll move it back on the agenda as well. All right. You're up. Finance. 3-month budget review.
From the beginning.
Good to go? Okay. All right. Good evening. Let me take my mask off.
You get a taller mic.
Okay. Can shift it up here a little bit.
There you go.
There we go. All right. Good evening, Mayor and Board of Aldermen. Stephen Larson, Finance Director. Tonight, I'll be providing you with a 3-month budget update for our fiscal year 2022 budget. And just as a reminder, our fiscal year started back on November 1st of 2021 and will run through October 31st of 2022. So this reflects 3 months of fiscal year activity. Advance with the arrows. Arrow over this one. All right.
Well, now is this one gonna work? No.
All right, we'll advance the slides. I can just. There we go. Okay, we're back in business. All right. So just a few budget comments before we begin. The board has previously approved a budget amendment number 1 and is in the stage of the second reading for approving budget amendment 2, which will help us provide budget capacity for key capital improvement projects. And it's on the agenda for tonight's meeting. The expenditures so far for our payroll, we've gone through 6 payroll periods through 3 months. There's 26 pay periods in the year. So we've paid out about a quarter, about 23% of wage related payrolls. We'll start off tonight by looking at the general fund. General fund is the city's main operating fund that houses a variety of city departments and key revenues. That's been performing quite well in the first 3 months of the fiscal year. Looking at revenues, we have budgeted about 4.9 million in revenues, and we're projecting to be a little bit over that, about 4.96. Year to date, we've brought in about 1.8, which is equal to about 37%. I see the PowerPoint over there. Typically, those revenues are going to exceed 25% through the first quarter because we receive a large disbursement for our property taxes. So that's typical to see that. On the expenditure side, we're currently projecting to budget a little bit under with some vacancy savings. We're a little bit under at 25% of our budget expended at about 24. So that's good to see. We have a number of key capital improvement projects and other one-time expenditures that we'll work through this year. Includes electrical upgrades at the campground, our GIS and asset management program, our facility engineering, our transportation master plan that we just heard about, and completing the rest of the streetscape phase 2. Getting into some of our more major general fund revenues, our property taxes have performed so far very well in 22. Our budget is 935,000 for this year, and we have received 907 through the first 3 months. Projecting to be about 950 for the year, and that could go up further depending how they come in. But typically at this point, we receive about 92% of what we eventually receive for property tax. So to see that at 97% of the budget is a good promising indicator at this point. Looking at a 3-year trend history of property tax, you can see it from fiscal year 20 and 21. We've had good, steady, consistent growth of about $50,000 to $55,000. So far through the first quarter, they're in blue. We've exceeded what we've brought in the previous 2 fiscal years. Another major revenue for the general fund, nearly 25% of the revenue budget is our 1% city sales tax. For this year, we've budgeted 1.23, and at this time, we're still projecting to bring in that amount of revenue. We've collected about $300,000, which is about 24.4% of the budget. Typically, on average, at this point in the year, we see about 22% come in of what we typically receive. So to see our budget percentage at 24.4 is good. And we're continuing to monitor TIFEs and make sure those are backed out so that those revenues are reflected appropriately. Looking at the 3-year trend for sales tax, you can see in the blue that our first quarter for fiscal year 22 has performed quite well compared to the previous fiscal years. We're about $20,000 higher from fiscal year 20 and about $34,000 higher from 21. Last year, we brought in about 1.26 million and anticipating again to be around that mark. I'm still just projecting a little bit conservative in the previous slide with the budget. And finally, the use tax revenue has continued to be a bright spot in our revenues. This year, we've budgeted about 560,000. We're still projecting to bring that in. We are at about 150,000 right now through the first 3 months, and that's close to about 27% of the budget. And typically, we're receiving about 29% of the use tax that we eventually receive. So we're a bit behind that mark. So it's important to continue to monitor that. When we look at the 3-year trend for use tax, it really has exploded as online purchases have continued to grow and people have goods and services delivered to their home. You can see in the orange bars, we've had tremendous growth in the last couple of years for use tax. On a quarterly basis, this year has done extremely well compared to the previous first quarters of 2020 and 2021. So we're on pace to have a great year for this revenue, and it'll be an important component of our budget. I'll switch gears here to one of our special half-cent sales taxes, the capital improvement sales tax. This sales tax has been integral to providing our community with strategic investments. You can see pictured there the basketball court that was constructed at Heritage Park. A portion of that was paid with the capital improvement sales tax. This sales tax has performed well in the first 3 months, as we've collected about 26% of the budget. Typically, we see about 20% of it collected through the first 3 months of what we end up receiving. So it's on target to hit that budget. We have a number of capital improvements along with our transfer to debt service that we've obligated for these funds, and we'll begin spending those as the year goes on. At this time, we have recorded no expenditures out of the fund. Capital improvement sales tax has performed well. Similar to the other sales taxes you've seen, there's been good consistent growth year over year with the orange bars. And again, our first quarter of 2022 has done exceptionally well. I'll touch on the debt service fund here. The debt service fund really is a pass-through account for the city that's used to pay for principal and interest related to the general obligation debt that the city has issued. At this time, we haven't recorded any activity in the fund. As we move through the year, we'll go ahead and make our principal and interest payments, and we'll see those recorded in the expenditures, and we'll transfer monies over from the capital improvement sales tax fund to pay for that debt obligation. Go back to another 0.5-cent sales tax, the transportation sales tax fund. It has also been performing well this year, just a little bit below the 25% mark for sales tax for percent of revenues received to budget. We're around about 22% of what we typically bring in each year at this time. We have a number of big projects that will expend out of this fund that include our annual mill and overlay program. A portion of the streetscape phase 2 will be paid out of this, and our 4th Street Terrace road repairs will be paid out of this. So it continues to provide the funds to have excellent transportation networks and make repairs and maintenance to our roads in this community. Transportation sales tax in the first quarter with the blue bars, again, has performed well, as we're about $15,000 higher than the previous 2 quarters. And again, you'll see with the orange, we have steady, consistent growth. Touch for a moment on the special allocation fund. This fund is the fund that collects activity related to the marketplace. So it's going to be collecting a CID sales tax, TIF economic activity taxes, and all the property taxes that are due to the developer in the fund. One of the items in the audit that was flagged was the ability to segregate our CID sales taxes away from this fund. So you'll see in tonight's agenda a proposal on a first reading to establish a CID fund. Right now, those revenues are quite high. We have some disbursements that went out to the entities that are due their taxing increments with the marketplace. But I expect this to perform very well this year as we have consistent and new businesses in the marketplace. We haven't made any expenditures yet. As those get approved with our legal counsel, you'll see those come into the fund. We'll switch gears again to the water and sewer fund. You can see there's a picture of the progress made out at Smith's Fork for the piping and foundation of the raw water pump station. At this time for revenues, the fund has received about $1.2 million in revenues, which is about 21% of the budget. The budget number does include about $800,000 that we're expecting to receive from Clay County for the ARPA funding for that raw water pump station. So the percentage is a little below 25% for that reason. On the expenditure side, number of projects there you can see to be completed this year. And as we complete those, that percent budget expenditure number will rise. Now, looking at the 2 major revenues for the water wastewater fund, it's the sale of water and wastewater. Both of those are performing well at this time. For water sales, we've budgeted about 2.7, and we've received about 650,000 year to date. That number is at about 24% of the budget, and we typically see a greater wastewater and water sales as we get into the summer months and consumption increases. On the wastewater sales side, we're at about 28% of the budget, so I anticipate that making the budget with no issues at the rate it's currently going at. The 3-year history of Q1, we've seen consistent growth with growth in customers and accounts. We've seen growth in both water and wastewater sales year over year through the Q1. Quickly look at the sanitation fund here. This fund really is a pass-through for the city's contract with GFL and the revenues that we receive from customers to pay for that trash contract. Both revenues and expenditures are really on target at this time. I'll move real quick here to the 3-year trend. You can see both the blue and the orange have decreased compared to 2021. And in the budget process for fiscal year 2022, the board approved rate decreases. And so we've seen a decrease in revenue, but also a decrease in expense when we negotiated a lower contract. So able to offer residents a lower rate along with the senior discount that was approved in the previous budget cycle. Move on to our last half-cent special sales tax. The park and stormwater sales tax has performed well through the Q1. We've received about 26% of that budget. The initial collections for this sales tax, it's our newest half-cent sales tax. We started collecting in November of 2020. And it's already helped make a major impact in our community. There you can see the splash pad pictured on the left. For fiscal year 2022, we have a number of big projects, both in the park and stormwater arenas. Includes Diamond Crest Neighborhood Park, and playground and improvements to that, and the development of a stormwater master plan. As those projects are approved by the board and are underway, we'll see expenses accumulate in that fund. The Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund is the fund that the city has established as a part of collaborating and partnering with Enterprise to lease vehicles. At this time, the city has sold 10 vehicles through Enterprise. I got an update to that number. They've recently picked up 4 vehicles, which are pending sale. As a part of our fiscal year 2022 budget, we've transferred $135,000 into the VERF from the general fund. Of that $175,000 in revenues, $135,000 will be used to help fund the leasing costs for 4 new police vehicles. That's going to start our efforts to start replacing an aging police fleet. Those police vehicles are on order and in the production stage. Our expenditures just reflect 3 months of leasing costs. I expect those to increase a little bit more as we have more vehicles on our leasing program as they arrive at the city. On the left there's one of the new vehicles for Public Works with the salt spreader. I know the old one was in a pretty rough shape and had rust and some complications. So getting these vehicles updated on the road are going to bring efficiencies for the city, make sure that our staff can do their jobs well, and make sure they operate without expensive maintenance. The last fund for our budget update for the night, the ARPA fund. The American Rescue Plan Act fund houses ARPA monies that the city of Smithville has received and will receive this year. We received our first disbursement of ARPA funds on September 8th, 2021, and we're expecting to receive our second disbursement no later than 12 months after our first disbursement. So expecting to see those funds come in around late August or early September of this year. These funds have been obligated for the raw water pump station project, been approved by the board for that use. And then the remaining amount of that project expenditures, I mentioned earlier, Clay County approved a board resolution with their commission to provide us with about $800,000 in funding. So at this time, we're waiting on that second disbursement. So you see a 0 there for revenues. And our strategy is to utilize funding first with Clay County, and then we'll use our ARPA funding as the remainder as we complete that project. That concludes the budget update for the first 3 months. Does the board have any questions?
Any questions?
Stephen, just thank you again for your great work, you and your staff on putting these numbers together. I think they're getting easier and easier. Maybe it's because I'm a year into this, but thank you very much for the update.
Well,
Any public comment? Sweet.
Mayor, if I could just interject a couple of comments also to expand on what Stephen was saying. One of the things, we want to provide the 3-month budgetary information to you all so that you know where we stand as we begin in the budget development process. But also to let you know that we are monitoring those expenditures and revenues on a monthly basis, but also as things change. You'll hear, I'll note this again in the city administrator's report, but just over the last few days, as a result of the world situation, we're receiving word on increases in asphalt prices. We know fuel prices are going up. That affects our fleet and our ability to do work in those ways. It also has spillover effects on those prices. And some of our larger projects, we also are seeing potential cost increases based on the cost of supplies and also potential delays because we've had indications from our engineers on projects that some of the materials is not only a supply chain issue right now, it may be caught up in materials needs for global events. So we monitor that on a daily basis. So just to make sure that you know that all goes into this information then as well.
Thanks, Ms. Wagner. Any questions, Ms. Wagner? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the work session.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Let's say no. Got a 5-minute break.